My name's Carol Lowy. I'm a library trustee, and on behalf of all the trustees of the Brookline Library, I'm pleased to welcome you to what promises to be a fascinating, maybe even spine-tingling evening. You all know who Whitey Bulger is. He's our generation's Al Capone, the greatest, or maybe it's better to say the worst gangster ever to operate in Boston. I've always thought of his life as a kind of morality play, all about good and evil, mostly evil, loyalty and corruption, temptation, and maybe even a little love. We'll have to wait till the trial is over, and from what happened today, we don't know if there ever will be a trial, to see if there's any redemption or atonement. I don't think there's going to be much salvation. Lots has been written about Whitey Bulger over the years. The book you're going to hear about tonight, and many of you already have in your hands, called Whitey Bulger, America's Most Wanted Gangster and the Manhunt That Brought Him to Justice, is the latest. The publication date was actually March 4th, so it's really hot off the press. It's the latest and the most authoritative book on Bulger, and it's been pretty much since it came out on the New York Times bestseller list, so it's pretty cool. The authors, Kevin Cullen and Shelley Murphy.
She's in the newsroom right now.
I assume you all heard the story that broke just a little while ago? No. I'll let Kevin tell you in a minute. Anyway, Kevin and Shelley have followed Bulger for years, and I suspect you followed them for years in the Globe. Kevin is a Metro section columnist. He's won a Pulitzer Prize for articles on the sexual abuse scandal that rocked the Catholic Church, and was the first to sniff out the connection between Bulger and the FBI. We're going to be hearing about that too this evening. Shelley is also a prize-winning journalist. I'm really sorry she's not here, and has covered organized crime for the Globe and is doing it again. There will be some commentary from Kevin and then a question and answer period, and I know that after his talk you'll want to get your hands on the book if you haven't already. I'm pleased to tell you that we have 101 copies in the Minuteman library system, but as of this morning there were 369 people, including me, on the waiting list. So you can join them in the electronic line, or if you don't want to wait, Brookline Booksmith, who is the library's partner in this event, and we're grateful for their collaboration. The Booksmith will be selling copies. You saw Peter at the desk right when you came in, and they'll be selling copies after the talk, and I suspect that Kevin will be willing to sign them for you. So please join me in welcoming, well, not welcoming Shelley Murphy, but also Kevin Cullen, and in spirit, Whitey Bulger, America's Most Wanted Gangster.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, folks, and I will start by apologizing for my co-author, Shelley Murphy, who is the hardest working journalist in Boston, and that's why she's not here, because I don't want to talk out of school, but the reason she's not here is that she did not get a call back from Whitey Bulger's lawyer, Jay Carney, until recently. She just called me and said she's still working on the story. So you will read it in the Globe tomorrow or online tonight. I'm thrilled that so many people have come out here tonight, and I specifically wanted to recognize in the audience a Brookline guy, Steve Davis. Steve's sister, Deborah, was murdered by Whitey Bulger, Steve Fleming. And one of the things that Shelley and I, when we sat down to map out this book, what we wanted to do that had, in some respects, there's already been too many books written about Whitey Bulger, so why should we write another one? One of the things Shelley and I talked about is that we really believe that the victims of Whitey Bulger were paid lip service in the previous books. They were mentioned in passing. And one of the things, if you read the book, I think you will get a feeling for a lot of people suffered as a result of Whitey Bulger's actions, and specifically because of our government's protection of Whitey Bulger, the FBI's protection, and also the Justice Department's protection. And Steve's family not only suffered the loss of Deborah, but they suffered the slings and arrows and smears of our government for many years. And I just want to give Steve credit because he's never abandoned his sister, and Shelley and I won't either. I wanted to start with trying to create an image for you. If you can in your mind think of an 83-year-old man sitting in an 8x12 cell for 23 hours a day, doing 155 push-ups every day, and then spending the rest of that time on this little metal table that it's a shelf that sticks out. He sits on a little metal stool, and he writes furiously every day. And he's given a limited amount of paper. So what he does is when he runs out of room, he starts writing in the margins, upside that way and downside that way. And he has arrows pointing here and there so you can follow. And he's writing like that because he's running out of time. And he wants to change the narrative. And if you can picture that person in that little cell, that is Whitey Bulger today, sitting in his cell in Plymouth as we speak. Whitey wants to change the narrative because it doesn't fit with the myth he has created since he was a little boy, since he was a young teenager, stealing stuff off the back of trucks in Southie, what they call tailgating. Because from the age of 15, 16, 17, Whitey Bulger was deeply engaged in myth-making. And he wanted you and me and all his neighbors in South Boston and the projects, the Old Harbor Project, to believe that he was a good bad guy. He was a benevolent hood. And so go back to him when he was a teenager. And in the projects, very few people had cars. But Whitey Bulger had a car. And he had a car because he was a criminal. And he used that car to curry favor with his neighbors. So when he saw old Mrs. Moakley walking down the street laden down with groceries, he stopped and gave her a ride home. Mrs. Moakley's son, Joe Moakley, became the congressman. Fast forward, Whitey Bulger is a bank robber. And when he was going into banks, both in Melrose, Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Indiana, when he would rob the bank, sometimes with 2 guns, he would try to put people at ease and tell them jokes. And in Indiana, he mentioned something about Dillinger. And that, John Dillinger did what we're doing. Some kind of remark about that. And in his mind, he was the benevolent bank robber. He wouldn't hurt anybody. He'd point a gun at you, he wouldn't shoot you. Fast forward when he's caught in 1956. Whitey Bulger grew up in an Irish ethos. Even though South Boston had a mix of an awful lot of Eastern Europeans, a lot of Poles, a number of Italians, Lithuanians, Armenians, Southie was Irish. The little kids in the public schools were taught Irish songs. The symbol of the neighborhood is a leprechaun in a belligerent pose like this. The ethos of the place is Irish. And there is nothing worse in the Irish consciousness than being an informer. So Whitey could never admit that he was an informer. So in 1956, when he was caught and involved in his bank robberies, his girlfriend of the time, Jackie McAuliffe, who, if you could picture Jane Mansfield back then, that's what Jackie looked like. Jackie was implicated in being in some of the robberies in Indiana. She accompanied him out there. And the FBI suggested they were going to charge her. So Whitey decided that to keep her out of the way he presents it, he was going to save his girlfriend. He was the gentlemanly bank robber. And what he did is he cooperated with the FBI. And he actually gave up his accomplices back in 1956. And what he did is he put it on her. He made her identify the guys. And that kept her, and the way he presented it in the letters Shelley and I have acquired that give you a little insight of where he's thinking, is that he did it very nobly to save Jackie McAuliffe, but he didn't, because it's myth-making, it's baloney. He put her in the mix so she would take credit, so she would be the person seen as giving up his accomplices, but he gave up the accomplices, and the FBI went along with it. So that's when Whitey's first interaction with the FBI was back then in 1956. So then Whitey goes off to the can, and he begins a correspondence at his brother Billy, the politician's, not yet a politician at that time. Billy was a law student at Boston College Law School. And Billy's dean at that time was a fellow named Bob Drinan. You may remember Bob Drinan as a congressman, the first congressman who called for the impeachment of Richard Nixon. Bob Drinan became, for lack of a better term, a prison pen pal. He was a spiritual advisor for Whitey. He later became his parole advisor. Whitey Bulger got out of prison early. He was given 20 years for a sentence for bank robbery. He got out after 9. And he got out of prison largely because he had because of his brother Billy, who was a budding politician, and by the time Whitey was in Alcatraz in 1960, Billy Bulger had actually been elected to the state legislature as the representative from South Boston. Billy Bulger had lined up some very influential supporters for Whitey. Now, beyond Bob Drinan, then the dean of the Boston College Law School, the Speaker of the House, well, initially the Majority Leader, John McCormick, who came from South Boston and was friendly with the family, intervened on Whitey Bulger's behalf. By the time, in 1960, when Whitey got sent to, right now he's in Alcatraz in 1960, John McCormick became the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And this was not like, somebody writing a letter. John McCormick directed or asked the head of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons to intervene on Whitey's behalf. The director of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons flew from Washington to San Francisco to visit Whitey Bulger in Alcatraz. So it's an important part of understanding Whitey at that time, because when he was in prison, he knew he got out because of political power. He realized that the perception of power was even more important than the actual exercise of it. And the other thing he did when he was in prison, and if you read the book, we call that chapter The University of Alcatraz. Whitey Bulger really educated himself. He's the guy that dropped out of school when he was in 9th grade. He never had the time or the patience to sit around and listen. And yet, if you read the letters that we got from that era, there's a letter that he wrote from the Charles Street Jail to Bob Drinan in 1956, on the eve that he was convicted and given 20 years in prison. And what is so striking about the letter is that it has perfect syntax. The penmanship is immaculate. And the most striking thing, I actually found it in the Boston College papers, that Bob Drinan donated his papers to Boston College. Well, his legislative stuff is actually down at Georgetown, but he gave a lot of things to BC. And it's funny because that was the only letter about Whitey Bulger. And I've talked to people who were, including Sanford Katz, his friend at Boston College Law School, and they basically think that Bob kind of purged all this stuff, but he missed this one. And you wouldn't know it was from Whitey because it just says, your friend Jim at the end of it, but we know it's Whitey because it's the only person he makes references to his bank robbery thing. But the most striking thing about that letter, I remember when I went through it, it said, at the end of it said, written after lights out. He wrote this letter in the dark, and it was perfect. But Whitey really became an educated person in prison. Shelley actually went out to, I keep pointing to Shelley, she's not here. Shelley actually went out to Alcatraz and retrieved his entire prison record from the National Archives at San Bruno. And she also stood in his cell, and she could touch the walls with her hands like that. And we found out what he read. And it's amazing what he read. He read Machiavelli. He read Kant. I can't get through Kant. Can you? I can't. He read an awful lot of philosophy. He read an awful lot of military history. He read about the the strategy of counterintelligence and counter-surveillance. He came out of Alcatraz, or came out of prison in general in 1965, well positioned to do anything. He was that smart. He had a brother who was able to get him a job at the Suffolk County Courthouse, which is just where you want to put an ex-con. And yet, from our research, we found that Whitey lasted about a year in the legitimate world. He just did not want to get up and work for a living. He tried construction. He actually worked construction with my cousin Johnny Cuniff from my whole maternal side is from South Boston. That's another story. But my cousin John was an All-America, two-time Beanpot MVP at Boston College. And he actually worked construction sites with Whitey when Whitey came out. But after about a year, Whitey said, the hell with this. And he ended up getting into with a gang in Southie called the Colleen Brothers. They ran rackets in South Boston. And Whitey's timing was perfect because the time that he was in prison, there was this huge gang war, mostly Irish guys killing Irish guys, and the Italians sat back and laughed. And by the time Whitey got out, the gangland horizon, the landscape had been so decimated, it allowed him to rise very quickly. And, but then there was a slight problem in South Boston. They had their own little internecine gang war, just in South Boston. And there was an upstart group of guys called the Mullins. They called them the Mullins because they hung out at a square in the City Point section of South Boston, which was named after a World War I veteran named John Mullen. So they called themselves the Mullins. And these guys, a lot of these guys had been in Nam. They'd been in Vietnam, and they came back, and their attitude was, you know what? We're not taking crap from these guys, the Colleens. We'll do whatever we want. We just survived combat in the jungles. We don't give a shit what the Colleens think. And so they started fighting with each other, started shooting each other, they started killing each other. And Whitey, he was so smart. After the Mullins struck and killed Donnie Colleen, the leader of the Colleen gang, they actually drove out to his house in Framingham, lured him out of the house during a birthday party for his young son, and shot him. Whitey went unannounced and sought out Howie Winter, who was the leader of the Winter Hill gang based in Somerville, but really the Irish mob. And Howie actually cooperated with Shelley and I. He talked to us at length. And he said that Whitey just came out of the blue and said, you need to mediate the end of this gang war. We can't be fighting and killing each other in Southie anymore. Yeah. And Howie told us that Whitey was really charismatic. Now the funny thing is that the Mullins had the upper hand at the time, and they were like thinking, oh, we're gonna be great when this, they were thrilled that Howie was gonna mediate this war. They figured that Howie would see that they were winning and he liked them, and Howie would say, you guys are in charge, but no, that ain't what happened. Whitey was able to basically schmooze Howie to a point that Howie basically, at that mediation in the old Chandler's nightclub in the South End, said Whitey will now be the head of the mob, of our mob in South Boston. And I asked Howie, I go, why would you do that? I thought you were more friendly with the Mullins guys. He goes, I like the Mullins guys, he said, but I like them more on a personal level. They're guys I wanted to have a beer with. The difference is that they were kind of wild and undisciplined. And Whitey was a guy that struck me as somebody who was disciplined. He took care of his body. He didn't drink to excess, which was very unusual among the Irish gangsters. He didn't take drugs. He was educated. He was well-read. And Howie told me he was very impressed that Whitey had done time. Whereas all the Mullins guys, the time they did was in the jungles of Vietnam. They hadn't done prison time. And that mattered in the gangland. They wanted to know you're somebody who knew what it meant to go to prison, because you would do anything not to go back to prison. So Howie decides that Whitey is the head of the mob in South Boston. Fast forward to 1975. John Conley, who grew up in the same project as Whitey, approaches him and asks him to become an informant. Now Conley's cute, and this approach to Whitey was based on several different levels. One was sheer careerism. The FBI promotes, rewards, and encourages its agents not necessarily to make cases, to roll informants. You become big in the FBI by having a bunch of guys in your pocket who will tell you stuff. So at that time in 1975, Whitey was one of the preeminent Irish gangsters in the city. And Conley approached him because the FBI's national policy was to take out La Cosa Nostra, the mafia. The problem with that is that Whitey, the Italians wouldn't tell Whitey if his pants were on fire. He did not know the Italians that well. But his partner in crime, who he joined up with in the Winter Hill Gang, Stevie Flemmi from Roxbury, did know the Italians. The Italians, the mafia had been asking Stevie to join the mafia for years. And Stevie was cute too. He strung them along, he socialized with them, he was in with them in the North End, he knew them all. And he had been working as an informant for the FBI since the 60s, when a very corrupt agent named Paul Rico recruited him. Now, this is one of the things we put in the book, because I think it's not out there in the public domain the way it should be. The FBI put Whitey and Stevie together. John Conley made them a team of informants, because he went to Flemmi after he recruited Whitey and said, I know you're a rat, basically said, and here's your opportunity. You and Whitey, he would call him Jimmy, work with us, we'll take out the Italians, you guys can do anything you want. But it's funny, when Whitey got back to Conley after his overture, Whitey, going back to the myth making and the sophistry he's so good at, he says, yeah, I'll help you, but I'm no informant. I'm a strategist. I'm an analyst. I'm a liaison. No, Whitey, you're an informant and you're a rat. But it was very important to him, because I go back to that Irish consciousness. An informant is the worst thing you can be. It's worse than being a killer. So Conley's like, fine, you can call yourself anything you want. I'll call you anything you want. And go back to Conley's motivation. Like I said, it makes him look good. He has a top echelon guy in his pocket. But it goes way beyond that. This is very Southie. This is about paying back Billy Bulger, who was a mentor for John Conley. John Conley left South Boston and went to school in the North End because Billy encouraged him to. John Conley went to Boston College because Billy encouraged him to. John Conley became an FBI agent because Billy encouraged him to. Billy Bulger was one of the most important people in John's life as a young man, and he would credit him, and he told me with his own words how much Billy Bulger meant to him. So one of the reasons Conley did it, beyond sheer careerism, is in Southie, and particularly in the projects, loyalty to your family, your neighbors, your neighborhood is highly valued, probably too highly valued. And so when Conley reached out to make him an informant, it was not just to help his resume, it was to help the Bulger family, to keep the Bulger family away from the scandal that would have enveloped it if Whitey Bulger was ever indicted. And then step back even further, and I can say this because John Conley was my best FBI source for a number of years. And whenever I would ask him, you know, I'm a young reporter, and the other thing is John Conley sought me out. When I came back to, I graduated from UMass Amherst in 1981. I started working in the Holyoke Transcript, which is late and departed, not there anymore, and I learned a lot there. And then I came back. The Boston Herald hired me in 1983. I remember I called my mother, who was a South Boston lady. I said, Mom, good news. Boston Herald just hired me. I'm coming home. And she said, oh, really? That's nice. Do you know there's a fireman's exam on Saturday? Thanks, Mom. So, and I wasn't at the Herald 2 weeks. I get a call out of the blue from an FBI agent who I kind of vaguely knew, John Conley. He says, I'm very close with your cousin Johnny. Oh, okay. He goes, what do you say I swing by and pick you up? As John Conley recruited Whitey Bulger as an informant, he recruited me as he made me his source, or he made him my source. It was like weird. And I was very thankful because I'm 24 years old. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I have this very senior FBI agent talk to me, drive me around. Whenever I asked, I was the crime reporter at the Herald, and I left for the Globe in '85. So over all those years, I'm always asking about Bulger. And Johnny's driving me around in the Crown Vic, and he says, he's a great guy. Great guy. He's a hood. He's a killer. Oh, well, you know, Johnny's attitude was, and a lot of people in South Boston share this, there will always be rackets. There will always be racketeers. But if somebody's going to control the rackets, we're much better off with a guy like Whitey Bulger than some cocaine cowboy who's going to shoot anybody who comes down the pike. And I was like listening to this, and I'm saying, Johnny, that's not what I hear. I heard this guy's a really bad guy. And I remember saying to him in a conversation, I said, you know, I said, the state cops are telling me that, you know, Stevie's girlfriend, Debbie, is gone. And they think the worst. Nobody can find her. And this is Debbie Davis, Steve's sister. And John Connolly said, no, they would never do anything like that. And John said to me, he goes, I think she's in Texas. I said, Texas? I said, if she's in Texas, I think they could find her. And so over a period of years, I'm at a point, I said, the most senior FBI agent in Boston who specializes in organized crime keeps telling me that Whitey Bulger's a good guy. And then almost always adding that Billy Bulger's the greatest guy in the world, should be the mayor, should be the governor, should be the president. I'm like, this is so weird. So I had an epiphany. And near the end of it, and I'm trying to think at the time, I actually asked Jack Driscoll, the retired editor of the Boston Globe. I approached him in early 1988, and I said, I don't know how to explain this, but I said, I think Whitey Bulger's a rat. I think he's an informant for the FBI. There's no other explanation. They had taken the mafia guys out in 1983, so 5 years later, it's so obvious the most powerful gangsters in Boston are Whitey Bulger and Stevie Fleming and their partners, and the FBI won't move on them. There's only one explanation. And I didn't come out of the blue with it because I went to guys that I trusted in the state police and the DEA, and they all said, they said, yeah, of course it's true, but how do you get it in the paper? I don't know. So I went to Jack, and Jack assigns me to, he says, well, we gotta go on this. And we convened our investigative team, the Spotlight team, and I was assigned to it. And with that team, we put together a report in which we were able to confirm on many levels that Whitey was in fact an informant for the FBI. And we were preparing a 4-part series called The Brothers Bulger, about the Bulger mystique, about these guys. The most powerful gangster in Boston is Whitey Bulger, and his brother's the most powerful politician. So about 2 months before we go to print that, I get a call at the Globe from an FBI agent named Tom Daly. He said, Kevin, I know what you're working on. If you put that in the paper, first of all, I'm going to tell you, Whitey Bulger's not an informant. If you put that in the paper, he will kill you. Okay. And I lived in South Boston with my wife. And obviously that was chilling, and I said, and I didn't thank him for the phone call. But we sat down and we talked about it, and Jerry O'Neill, who was the editor of the Spotlight team at the time, said, write a note right now, a memo, as best you remember that conversation, which I did. And then we decided, you know, as weeks passed, first thing I did after I wrote the memo, I called Bobby Long, a lieutenant detective in the Massachusetts State Police, who I literally trusted with my life, and told him what had happened. And then I called somebody I trusted in the DEA and told them what happened. And then I called a Boston cop detective named Frank DeWan, whose career was almost ruined because he was chasing Whitey Bulger, and corrupt forces in the FBI, in the Boston Police Department pressured Frank all along. And I told him what happened. Because if anything happened to me and my wife, I wanted these guys to know. And I believed that they would not rest until something happened, until they got to the bottom of it. And so weeks pass, and the FBI never makes a formal notification. So we come to the conclusion that this was just trying to scare us off the story. They did a pretty good job. I was scared. But anyway, this is so Boston. The Globe decides we got to take a precaution. So right before the series, the 4-part series ran, they decided to move me out of town. They moved me from South Boston, 9 stops on the Red Line. They moved me into a hotel in Harvard Square. They'll never find me there. So the story runs, the state police and the DEA have their informants out there in Southie trying to, what's the reaction? And Jackie O'Malley, a terrific state cop, now retired, but just a terrific cop. Jackie's informant came back and said, Jackie, Whitey's pissed. And Jackie goes, oh Jesus, we're gonna have to keep Kevin like out of town forever. And he goes, what's he pissed about? He goes, that piece in the series when they said that Whitey beat up a wino who was sitting in front of Teresa Stanley's house? Yeah. He goes, Whitey says that guy wasn't a wino. Jackie says, that's what he's pissed off about. Yeah. He says he's not a wino. Makes him look bad. Okay, so Shelley and I, during the research for the book, find an actual a debriefing report of what happened after the Globe series ran. Because the FBI brings him in and asks him, do you think your life is in danger because the Globe just outed you as an informant? And Whitey's reaction was, nobody will believe it. None of the wise guys will believe it. They'll just see it for what it is. It's the Globe. The Globe hates my brother. They're trying to embarrass my brother by doing that to me. Now we know, here's the idea that the FBI kept him on as an informant for 3 years after the Globe outed him says an awful lot about the arrogance of the FBI. But the other thing it says is that Whitey was, like I said, he was telling the FBI one thing. Privately, he was furious because he knew, he figured out very quickly that the FBI, it wasn't our only source, but the guy that confirmed it for us within the FBI was John Morris, who was John Conley's equally corrupt supervisor, who had taken money from Whitey Bulger, who had taken booze from Whitey Bulger, who was totally corrupted by Whitey Bulger, and who had helped Whitey Bulger kill people. So anyway, we moved down the road, and the FBI, of course, denies it's not true. They said blah, blah, blah. They actually, Jack, this, a guy named Ahern, who was the special agent in charge, he demanded a retraction, an apology, and he called me up and gave me crap. And I said, you know what? We can't retract or apologize for something that's true. So get in line. And Ahern went on to distinguish himself on the day that he retired from the FBI as he made disparaging remarks about Attorney General Janet Reno, about her sexuality. That's the kind of guy he was. So the story basically, you know, Conley's work and his people saying, the Globe's full of shit. They made the whole thing up. It's just state cops trying to cover their asses because they can't get an investigation done right. So it's not until 1997 that a very courageous federal judge named Mark Wolf exposes this and forces the FBI to admit, oh yeah, he was our informant. Well, thank you very much. And then obviously things go on from there and things spill out over the time. But the one thing I wanted to go back, and I'd love to take questions because I always find it better than me yapping on as taking questions, is that there are some great scenes in Brookline. Probably one of the most dramatic scenes is that Whitey was so pissed off about busing. It drove him crazy. He thinks that busing ruined the town. And he really wanted to make a statement. So he hated Garrity, Judge Garrity, who issued the order for busing. But he couldn't attack, he was not stupid. He knew that if he attacked Garrity, he would have been arrested. So what he did was to firebomb Jack Kennedy's birthplace on Beale Street. And before he did it, he wrote with spray paint, "Bust Teddy," because he blamed Ted Kennedy for backing Garrity and helping Garrity, and he firebombed it. I'm pretty confident that Jack Kennedy is the only president of the United States who had his birthplace firebombed by a gangster. And that's in one of my chapters, and I think you'll enjoy it. But I'll just drop it there, and I'd love to open it up for questions. Yes.
Can you talk about the role of the Justice Department? Can you talk about the role of the Justice Department?
The role of the Justice Department. Well, one of our chapters is specifically about how the Justice Department was totally duplicitous about this. That it was all about damage limitation for them. They made John Conley the scapegoat. There were at least 5 or 6 other agents they could have indicted like that, but they didn't. because they want the narrative to be one rogue agent, one rogue supervisor. That's it. That's what they want. Now, the other thing they did, which is really despicable, and this involves Stephen's family and other families, criminally, they said, oh, Conley did it all. Yeah, he's a scumbag, blah, blah, blah. And then when it got to the civil cases, when the families demanded justice and compensation, the Justice Department flipped. And they smeared the families, they smeared the victims. And, you know, Reggie Lindsay, who was a wonderful judge, died too young, had given the Justice Department, we go into this in the book, an out. He said, you know what? These families have been horribly damaged by the FBI's corruption and their partnership with Whitey Bulger and Steve Fleming. Let's create a fund modeled after the 9/11 compensation fund, or modeled after the Archdiocese of Boston compensation fund for victims of sexual abuse. And the Justice Department told Reggie Lindsay to get lost. And the Justice Department has spent millions and millions of dollars, our money, to insult the victims and not give them justice and not give them money. They have spent more money litigating than they would have if they just settled with the families. And I find that, like I said, we have a whole chapter in just about that. It's one of the things that to this day drives me crazy. And when Bob Mueller from the FBI director, says this is ancient, he used the term ancient history, he's full of shit. It's not ancient history. It's not ancient history to these families. And it's not ancient history to me. And it shouldn't be ancient history to any of you folks. The government has been horrible in the way they've dealt with this.
Are those cases still open?
Well, no, most of the cases are all done, but you have to, and we go through this, most of the families did not get any justice. The government conveniently was able to convince judges who didn't show much courage that the statute of limitations had expired. You have 2 years, basically. Once you figure out that the government is screwing you, you have 2 years to get a claim in. And the idea that these poor families, who are they going to trust? How are they supposed to figure out who's telling the truth? When the government's saying this, they're saying that, they're saying this. It's, like I said, whatever you think about Whitey Bulger, he's a criminal. I expect him to act like that. I don't expect my government to act like that. And it pisses me off to this day that they still have never apologized to the families. It's unbelievable. I got to climb off my soapbox now and then take another question. Yes?
I have heard a rumor that the reason that Whitey got caught was it the FBI who was chasing him at that point? Whoever was chasing him.
I never thought they were chasing him.
Whoever
They were strolling after him.
was embarrassed by the fact that when Osama bin Laden got killed and everybody said, how could he be hiding in plain sight? They must have known he was there. And others said, oh yeah, what about Whitey Bulger? Did that embarrass people enough to change their tactics?
I don't know. You know, I was the most skeptical. If you want to hoot, go on, put my name with Charlie Rose on YouTube, and I'm on with Charlie like the day after Whitey got pinched. I'm like, I don't believe any of this. I didn't believe the way it went down because it went down too quick. They put on the public service announcements, and then the story was somebody. But to be honest, my pal Shelley found the informant. He found the woman who gave him up, and we have great detail on the book about that. She was a former Miss Iceland, and she used to live in Santa Monica, and she knew them because they took care of a cat. Like they fed a stray cat, and she was so impressed by it. She didn't like Whitey because he's kind of a racist, not a nice guy, but she knew her Kathy Gregg, Whitey's girlfriend, as Carol, because that was their alias of it. Charlie and Carol Gasco. So she remembered them as people who take care of the cat. And one of the funny lines, like I said, I didn't even go to one of the things that really distinguishes our book is that everybody seems to have an opinion about Whitey, but we have Whitey's opinion of himself because we got his letters that he's sent from jail. And it's a very high opinion. I mean, Whitey is many things, but he does not lack self-esteem. But one of the lines, the great lines in that, he said, in one of his letters, he says, "A cat got me captured." So I don't buy that. I'm the biggest conspiracy theorist at the globe, and I don't even buy that it's a conspiracy theory. Yes, sir.
Kevin, wasn't there a Boston sports bar?
Hey, Bob, I haven't seen you forever. How are you?
Last time I saw you with the Lawrence. Remember that time you were speaking at the
Last time you saw me, I had black hair.
Wasn't there a Boston sports bar?
Yeah, Sonny McLean's, I've been in Sonny McLean's, I can guarantee you Whitey did not go in there.
Okay, that's
Those would be all Boston people, he's not gonna, he very seldom left the apartment. He would go out, him and Kathy strolled in the morning, and they strolled at dusk. He didn't leave the apartment, he did not go to Sonny McLean's. First of all, Whitey doesn't like sports. He was always into singular pursuits. And he wore the Red Sox hat only because every old Irish American guy, he just blended in. That's why he wore the Red Sox hat. Jeez, yes ma'am.
Do you think if this ever goes to trial, anything will come out?
Oh, he'll make allegations. The problem is, can he corroborate them? I doubt it. It's just, the letters we got show the two things he most wants to accomplish at trial is to refute the idea that he killed the two women that he's charged with, Debbie Davis and Debbie Hussey, and he wants to refute the idea. He says he was never an informant, and we get back to the sophistry. I never put anybody in prison. I never testified against anybody. Please.
But Morrison was never, and Condon were never convicted, were walked away scot-free.
Right.
Think that they would be able to go after them now?
Right. But, I mean, I think, like I said, I think it's gonna be a lot of drama and a lot of baloney, but in the end, I mean, he only has to be convicted of 2 predicate acts to get a RICO conviction. He's charged with, I don't even know how many predicate acts, but he just wants to refute that stuff because that screws up his narrative. A gangster with scruples doesn't turn on his friends, and he certainly doesn't kill women.
But
So
no bombshells.
He'll make bombshells. I won't believe any of them. I wouldn't believe him if he told me the time of this. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and Jeremiah O'Sullivan, where does he fall in this?
Well, I mean, Bulger claims that O'Sullivan gave him immunity, which is, O'Sullivan, Whitey's watched way too many Jason Bourne movies. You can't give somebody immunity to murder. It's nonsense. It's just nonsense. Yes,
What's
sir.
the timeline of O'Sullivan's death and Whitey being captured?
Oh, many years past. I don't think there's any connection. Yes, sir. Way back there.
How you been?
Hey, I know you too.
You thought you wouldn't recognize me with a beer in my hand, but there we go.
How are you, Richard? What's up?
Good thinking. One thing I noticed when you talk about the FBI, the justice, there's no contrition when Boston police, New York police have these big scandals. There's a generation, they come back, they feel bad, and the next generation forgets back to the old way. But you don't see that with the feds.
They apologize for nothing, minimize everything. That's the feds. That's the way it is. Yes, sir. Yes.
It seems like there's been a kind of a lot of Hollywoodization of the whole Bulger mythos with like The Departed, and
Right.
I guess it might be kind of exploitative, I think, but and some of it's been good, like the show Brotherhood. But I mean, do you have any feelings on the?
I would say, first of all, Marty Scorsese doesn't know how to make a bad movie. That said, that was based on a Hong Kong crime drama.
Yeah.
The only reason the Whitey character even is that Billy Monahan, the kid who wrote it, is from Boston, and he grew up with, you learn out Whitey by osmosis. You grow here, so, but it really had nothing to do with him. I'll tell you one thing: Whitey saw the movie when he was in Santa Monica. He went to, we know a guy that saw him and actually reported seeing him and was there, and of course the FBI didn't follow him. I'm sure Whitey looked and said, "I was never that fat." Jack Nicholson, I didn't look like that. So, more questions? Because I gotta go out. Yes, sir.
The judge that wouldn't convict Whitey Bulger in Florida, wasn't there a crime in Florida? And then Bulger and his accomplice were not convicted?
No.
Because I thought there were indications that Bulger actually corrupted the justice system, not the Justice Department, but the justice system.
There's no case of a
got
judge.
to a judge.
I don't know any of that. I'm sorry, I just don't know that. I don't. Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm so tired.
How does Billy Bulger reconcile all of his brothers?
I think he reconciles it by being Chris Lydon gave me crap because I wasn't hard enough. He says I'm not hard enough on Billy. I can't go one way or the other. He's either in abject denial or he's totally disingenuous and he knows how bad his brother is, but I can't answer that. At the least, he's in denial and he thinks. The one thing we found by doing the research of this is that the Bulger family has an enormous persecution complex. And at the top of the list of them is my employer, the Boston Globe. I mean, Whitey's letters, he goes on about the Globe and me and Shelley, and we have all these motives because we hate his brother, which is not true. I mean, it's like, you know, Whitey calls, I can't even repeat what he's called Shelley in the letters. He called me a lowlife. And my response to that is even a serial killer can get one thing right. But I think Billy's in total denial. And the other thing I know is that Billy was propagated the good bad guy stuff. He was telling people that his brother never touched drugs, that he kept drugs out. It's nonsense. Now, whether he believed it, I can't say. Maybe he did. But, you know, all you gotta do is look at the incidents of drug abuse in South Boston. It was pretty high. I lived in Southie in the 80s and the 90s, and I saw people literally doing coke on the bars in West Broadway. They were putting it on the bars and snorting. And then you hear people, oh, we're not like Roxbury, we're not like Dorchester. What a bunch of baloney. And some people buy that crap, but it's not true. Yes, ma'am?
Can you just talk a second about what happened today and what that might mean for everything going?
Well,
I only heard a piece of
they
it.
I actually wrote a column 2 months ago saying Rick Stearns, the judge who had the case, should recuse himself. Because there were appearances of conflict. It's not just that he was a prosecutor in the office, in the U.S. Attorney's office, but he's very close friends with Bob Mueller, the head of the FBI. I just think it was a no-brainer. But he wouldn't remove himself because I think Rick's an honorable guy. I think he saw it as a personal attack on his integrity. He said, I'm not going anywhere. But I thought he should have stepped down a long time ago. I wrote as much. I'm frankly surprised the appeals court made that decision, but it was written by Dave Souter. It wasn't written by the former Supreme Court Justice Dave Souter, who was sitting on the court. That's the only reason I got it. That was just local people. These guys socialize with each other. Dave Souter is removed from that, so he did the right thing.
So now, how is that maybe going to change anything for you?
It's going to be randomly assigned, and as I remember when Rick did a response saying, if you follow the defense logic, that means 8 out of the 11 justices in the district should not hear the case because of the prosecutors, former prosecutors. My response is that's fine with me.
Bring somebody else.
There's 3 other judges that could handle it, including Bill Young, who I think would be great at it. And one of the reasons I think Bill Young would be great at it, he's one of the few judges who's expressed any empathy for these victims. He did right by the Donahue family, and then they got screwed at the appeals court level. So I hope Bill Young gets it. More questions? And I gotta go to the bathroom.
Use a cup. Other than Whitey Bulger, is there anybody that you wish you could have interviewed or shed some?
Other than Whitey, Billy, I would have liked to interview Billy. He didn't respond to us, and Whitey wrote letters saying, we wrote him in jail, and he wrote letters saying I wouldn't even give him the satisfaction of replying.
But anybody else in all these years that you've been over there and living there and going through all this, that there's somebody that you wish you could interview that might have shed some light?
The only
would be
two.
different information that
No,
you just
the only
knew
two.
that they knew. Any of the girlfriends that he was with, or the young
the only
girls
two
he
that
was
Shelley
with,
and I will
are still
have-
alive? Any of those
No.
ever found?
We got just about everybody we wanted the book. Obviously Kathy. I would like to talk to Kathy. And Billy and Whitey, that's it. But we got everybody else. that we
Everybody,
want.
all through their whole life and everything?
Yeah, no, I think, you can't interview everybody.
Yeah.
It's almost 500 pages. It's a very good
Oh, yeah,
course.
I know
What
that.
I need to do. Well,
Kevin, may I suggest you take one more question and then
okay,
we'll
I
let
think
you
I
rest?
think it's appropriate I am with the great Steve Davis.
Is any time there on the Bennett brothers?
Yeah, there is. We have a part about Whitby and all those guys, and it's interesting because the way Paul Rico rolled Stevie Fleming is he basically let Stevie know that one of the Bennett brothers gave him up in a crime, and then of course Stevie killed him. So Rico got that guy killed. I'm sorry, we got to cut it off.
Thank you.